And it kind of reminded me of today's passage because today we're in Genesis chapter 8, and we've had this flood that's been devastating, but now the flood's kind of subsiding, and God's going to start to open the door to a kind of a whole new world for people. Adam, his wife, his 3 sons, their wives, all got on the boat being a type of Christ. They all put their faith in God. They all did what God said. God said there's judgment coming unless you're kind of on board with me. And so now it's subsiding, and it's a whole new world. It kind of reminded me what Jeremy and Dorian and a few of the different gentlemen said. It's like I had a life of destruction, hurt, and pain, but then God intervened, and I got a new start and a new life. And Noah and his family are going, are going to experience that because they've just seen, the whole plan. Oh, thank you. You're sweet. Sue's amazing. My second wife. No. It's my second Sue. Oh my. Do we need to pray again? So, anyways, Noah and his family have experienced a lot of destruction, of course, and a lot of sadness. I think when the rain started, you can imagine them just thinking, why didn't so-and-so show up? Maybe you've invited someone to church, and it's like, I'll be there, but then they don't come, and you're hopeful, and you prayed for people. They had to deal with all of that, because as the floods came, there was a sense of a lot of people didn't make it. A lot of people didn't choose it, and it's heartbreaking, but God's ready to start something new. So we're going to dive in today in Genesis chapter 8. And here, of course, we're coming out of Genesis 7, where the floods had just filled the earth, had even covered the mountaintops in such a way that even the ark could float over Mount Ararat, which was close to 17,000 feet. And probably the last mountaintop in that region that people who saw the floods coming were probably trying to climb. I mean, it probably was a really scary mountain of people seeing the waters come and trying to escape it and panicking and realizing it's too late. There's so many verses in Scripture that say, God, the bridegroom's invited you to the wedding, come, but then he shuts the door, and then people are like, well, now let's go, and it's like, it's too late. There's limits. Like right now, for us and our friends, the door is open. Like you can get on the ark. You can come to Christ right now. Like you knock, he'll come in. Like you're free to get on board. But there's a time coming where the door shuts. And so we're picking up in Genesis 8 with really a whole new world, a fresh kind of new start. The rains have, in a sense, ceased, and God's going to do something new. So if you have it, let's read. We'll do 14 verses today, starting in Genesis 8:1. But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark, and he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. Now the springs of the deep and the floodgates of heaven had now been closed, and the rain had stopped falling from the sky, and the water receded steadily from the earth, and at the end of the 150 days, the water had actually gone down. And on the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The waters continued to recede until the 10th month, and on the first day of the 10th month, it's chilling how specific this is, right? The tops of the mountains actually became visible. After 40 more days, Noah opened a window that he had made in the ark, and he sent out a raven, and it kept flying back and forth until the waters had actually dried up from the earth. Then he sent out a dove to see if the waters had receded from the surface of the ground. But the dove could find nowhere to perch because there was still water over the entire surface of the earth. So the dove returned to Noah in the ark, and Noah actually reaches out his hand and takes the dove, and he brought it back into himself in the ark. He waited 7 more days, and again he sent out the dove from the ark. And when the dove returned to him in the evening, there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. Then Noah knew the water had receded from the earth. He waited 7 more days and sent the dove out again, but this time it didn't return. By the first day of the first month of Noah's 601st birthday year, the water had dried up from the earth. Noah then removed the covering from the ark and saw that the surface of the ground was dry. And by the 27th day of the second month, the earth was completely dry. How about that for specifics, huh? You got a lot of dates in there. I suspect Noah put those in his diary, and Moses goes ahead and passes on that tradition for us here in the scriptures, such detail. So here we have a very interesting passage. The kind of storm of the flood is, in a sense, over, but now it's still going to take time. And Noah records for us kind of how that time kind of unfolds. But he starts this chapter by saying, but God remembered Noah. That's interesting because, of course, God kind of tells Noah, time to board, get all the animals, here they come 2 by 2s, and, get everyone in. But then there's not a lot of conversation that's recorded for us, like, from God. It's not like they're texting each other. So now he's survived all this, and there may be a sense of, where'd God go? Like, what's next? And here, the scriptures tell us, God remembers Noah. Sometimes you may feel like you don't hear from for a while, or a lot's going on, or you have one of those weeks where you feel like, what's happening? And here the scriptures say he remembers Noah, Zakar. It doesn't mean he's calling to mind like he had forgotten. God can't really forget. This is anthropomorphic language, just saying that God had an endearing covenant response to Noah. He wants to be faithful to the promise that he gave Noah, and he remembered that. He hasn't forgotten. He's now acting on Noah's behalf. This same word was used in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah when it says God remembered Lot. It's also used of Rachel. God remembered Rachel. This is just a reminder. We also see that with Israel. God remembered Israel. Even when they're in slavery, God remembers. He doesn't forget. So this is kind of I think after all that devastation, kind of a touching, maybe tender way to say, God still cares. He's still compassionate. He's still, he hasn't forgotten Noah. Now, it says God remembered Noah. It doesn't say God remembers Noah's character or great attributes or Noah's righteousness or something like that. In other words, God rescues Noah not because, he was so good. That's not included here. It just reminds you, God in his mercy, because of their just faithfulness and obedience to get on board, he honors them. He extends his promise to them, that relationship. There's nothing in here that says, even though Noah's a pretty cool dude, we're going to find out later, he has his own flaws, but God is compassionate. God intervenes. God extends his grace. It goes on to say, not just Noah, though. As you can see, it says, and all the wild animals, the livestock that were with him in the ark. So God cares about everything, his whole creation, Noah and the animals that were included there. And then, in remembering him, he sends a ruah. It means breath, spirit, translated here, a wind, an invisible force over the earth. This is kind of an interesting phrase because we saw it in Genesis 1 in the creation story that the spirit hovers over the deep, there's a wind that comes over. Same term here now in Genesis 8. And God's now remaking the earth like he did in the original creation because he's starting over. He's cleansed everything. So there's a sense of, wow, what's going to happen here? And there's there's a sound like the Holy Spirit on Pentecost, a wind that starts to come over the land and starts to like heal the land. It's not only natural wind, but symbolic of the Spirit kind of hovering. And of course, things have changed now. There wasn't really wind prior to the flood. The temperatures were, just perfect. There was this vapor canopy and everything was kind of in the greenhouse effect. But now things are different. There's storms and there's rain and there's gray clouds and topography has changed and mountains have risen up and oceans have gotten deeper and there's a wind. But it says the waters receded. I was reminded of Psalm 104 here, which says the mountains rose and the valleys sank down to the place that you, God, appointed for them. Even the Psalms kind of mention this catastrophic event that God kind of reordered the whole world. And I think between you and I, just, I don't know, I have enough academic friends that don't really believe in God. I think there's subtle language in here just to remind you that God gets credit for stopping the flood. God gets credit for this reordering, not nature. A lot of people, a lot of the pagans, a lot of godless people in this time period, they worship the sun or the moon or the stars. We're going to see the sun's not even going to get mentioned in here. We're having the whole earth dried up, and they're not going to mention the sun. I think that's totally intentional. Like, don't want to confuse you. Like, this isn't like, some other god or deity out there that's doing this. Because there are other flood stories, and the sun is a prominent figure in those ancient stories. But this is the real story. God's the one who does this. We don't worship nature. He created nature, and nature obeys him. We saw that with Jesus, right? On the boat. He can calm the seas and the winds, and they're all subject to him. So that's kind of subtle in here. And of course, if you have a big view of God, then you have a big view of people. That's why people are sacred, because they're created in the image of God. If you take God out and elevate nature, as soon as nature is elevated, human beings are de-elevated. So he sends a wind, and the waters start to recede. Let's get to verse 2. And now he talks about those two sources where all the water came from. The springs of the deep, and the floodgates of heaven, they've now been closed. Yakale, it means like sealed or restrained. And the rain had stopped falling from the skies. So all that water from these two sources, he's sealed it. God sealed it. They didn't just arbitrarily stop. He sealed it. He reversed the chaos that he unleashed because he at a moment said, okay, let the waters. Remember when he created the waters at the beginning? There was the earth was formless and void, and and then he separated the waters. Then he unseparated them. There was the flood. Now he's like, we're reversing it. We're going to go back, and I'm going to separate them again. The waters will go above, and some will stay here below. And by the way, I'm doing that. I, God. So he's reversing it. It kind of reminds me of Job 1:21, which I wrote in my quiet time. Just the Lord gives, and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Kind of reminded me of that verse when I'm like, he can do what he wants. Verse 3. The water receded steadily from the earth. In other words, it didn't vanish. It recedes. It goes back where it came from. And at the end of the 150 days, the water had actually started to go down. That's 5 months, though. You hear the Noah story and you think 40 days and 40 nights. Well, that's a hard month. Yeah, but no, the rain was for 40 days and 40 nights, but then there was like 5 months of churning. This was just a side note to Dave. I don't know if it applies to anyone else, but I wrote in my own Bible, like, God's not in a hurry. Some things he just takes his time. I don't know if any of you are waiting for him to do anything, but it's like, okay, the 40 days and 40 nights are over. Let's go, wrap it up. And he's like, no more rain, but we got a lot going on for 5 months. And then it's like, okay, now we're done. Okay, recede, let's go. Let's get off the boat. And it's like, slow down. You're with God. Take your time. He wants to teach you stuff. So he does. Verse 4 gives us, on the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on the plural mountains of Ararat. So this is important because some people think the ark is on Mount Ararat. It doesn't really say that. It's in the mountains of Ararat. So we know it's in today what would be like Armenia. We know it's in that region. We don't know if it's exactly that mountain. This is eastern Turkey, southern Russia, northwestern Iraq. But we know that the ark comes to rest in those mountain areas. And the term rest is kind of interesting because it kind of implies that the ark was laboring for like 5 months, just putting up with a lot. But now it comes to rest. And of course, the ark is a type of Christ. So we find our rest in him. Verse 5 picks up, the waters continue to recede, little by little until the 10th month. And on the first day of the 10th month, well, now the tops of the mountains could actually be seen. They became visible. So we got 40 days and 40 nights, and then we got 150 days, and then we start to see it recede, and then now we actually see the mountaintops, and apparently it was significant enough, exciting. I think it must have been exciting to know, like, I can see a mountaintop, I can see some land, because he records apparently the specific date. I mean, this is so specific. This isn't like mythology or kind of a story or an analogy or something. He's like writing, this is the 17th day of the 7th month. It's so exciting. We saw a mountaintop, the 10th month, he gives all the details. So I think that's super fun. Verse 6, he says, after 40 more days of patiently waiting, Noah opened a window that he had made in the ark. This is not the side door. This is a window probably on the roof area. It's probably a hatch. It's really kind of translated in Hebrew more of a hatch. So he kind of lifts the hatch and takes a kind of a look for himself, verse 7. And then he determines, okay, well, I can actually start to see some mountaintops and stuff. Let's see if we're ready to go. So he takes a raven, which is a kind of a carrion bird who's, black. It's an unclean bird, but he lets it out, and it kept flying back and forth until the water had dried up from the earth. So this raven is just, not doing what he needs. It's like a good first test run, but it's like, okay, I don't know how to build a website. Okay, so let's try again. So verse 8 says, well, now he's going to go to plan B. He sends out a dove. A dove is a different kind of bird, obviously. It's a clean animal. It's an animal that could be sacrificed, so it kind of has a little more religious symbolism. It is kind of a symbol of Israel, too, by the way, a dove. So he sends a dove out this time to see if the water had receded from the surface of the ground, not just the mountaintops, but how far down did it go? But this dove, verse 9, could find nowhere to perch because there was still water over the surface of the earth. So it returned to Noah in the ark, and I don't know. I Noah's kind of a rugged guy. I mean, you got to be, if you build an ark for 120. You got to be good with a saw and tools, and he's probably got calluses. But I thought this is super tender. He reaches out his hand to take the dove, and then kind of brings it back into the ark. I'm like, oh, Noah, you're so sweet. I just pictured you being like a rough dude, get back in here. Like, you have no good news, but he's like, oh, come on. takes the dove back into the ark. So he realizes, well, he's smart. One, he's always been trusting in God, but he's also using, this is a good principle for us, his common sense, his intellect that God gave him. Opening the window was a way to kind of navigate by the stars and see what's going on environmentally. Using the creatures that God has given him, these kind of homing pigeons, if you will, right? He's like, well, God hasn't said anything yet. God could go, it's time, go. But he's waiting patiently, but he's also actively like, well, let's see what we can find out. So he sends this second dove, but it returns to the ark. And then verse 10 says, so he waited 7 more days. Super patient. 7 is a big Bible number, as you know. So he waits another Sabbath, if you will, another week. And so he sends out a dove again from the ark. Verse 11, the dove returns to him in the evening. Interesting detail, and that's normally when the birds come back to their nests, is in the evening. And there in its beak was this freshly plucked olive leaf, which, as you know, is an international symbol of peace and hope and life today, right here from Scripture. But he knows now land is exposed. And it's not only exposed. Remember, he needed not only the water to recede, but like if we're going to get off the boat, we'd have to live here. So this was really encouraging because now it's like, well, apparently the water's receded enough and something's grown. Right? And olive trees don't grow like on the top of the mountains. They're like at the base of the mountains. So we now know the water's down there and in this Mediterranean area that the olives had enough time to grow a little bit, or God at least allowed, it to recover. So I think Noah's pretty happy. Because that also means food. Right? If we're going to get off, we're going to have to do the food thing, and that Walmart is so far away, so this is very encouraging. Anyways, then Noah knew that the water had receded from the earth, verse 12. So does he get off right away? No, he waits 7 more days. And then he sends a dove out again, but this time it didn't return. And that was a symbol to him, not only is there life out there and the waters have receded, but the dove feels like it can survive there and live there. So I think we're getting close to getting ready to go. So by the first day of the first month of Noah's 601st year, the water had dried up from the earth. So Noah then removed the covering from the ark, and he saw for himself that the surface of the ground was indeed dry. And then, verse 14, by the 27th day, this is so exciting, I got baptized on July 9th, 19, like he's given specifics here. Of the second month, the earth was completely dry. This was a really fun verse for me to study. I looked through about 12, 13, 14 different commentaries to see what theologians had to say about this passage. And on this verse alone, almost unanimously, all of them said, for some reason, most translations end this sentence with a period. And that's just a bad translation. Normally they're talking about words, or this word's a better translation, or this word order is a better. They're like, it doesn't end with a period. They're unanimous that it should end with an exclamation. This is on the 27th day of the second month, the earth was completely dry. It's like, it's dry. Like, we can go. And so I drew a big exclamation in my Bible, like, you need that exclamation mark. This is the same dry that was used of the Red Sea when it was parted, and it says that it was dry and they could cross. Same as the Jordan, that God had dried it up and it was dry and they could cross. So anyways, it's cool. So next week we'll pick up on verse 15 and continue through, but it's like, well, do they get off right away? Well, no, they don't. They stay on 8 more weeks. And we'll talk like, what is going? Be patient. Just because it's dry, we need stuff to grow, and plus we have a little extra food in here and stuff. So until the mini mart opens locally, we're gonna. So we'll see that. But when I finished this part of the passage, I was like, well, what has changed? This passage is pretty, it's like a story, self-explanatory. This is what happened, and here's how it happened, and waters receded, and eventually it's dry, and the dove helped us to realize that and stuff. But what's changed? Well, the lands have changed. Because remember, they were teeming. It's kind of like a scene out of Lion King or something. God creates all these animals and water and land and trees and fruits and bushes and the Garden of Eden, and now it's desolate. It's going to be a little bit like a desert, but it's starting to be a blooming desert. So things are starting to grow, but it's not like it was. So there's a big change there. The air has changed. It used to be kind of a warm, gentle, again, greenhouse effect kind of air. Now the air could be a little bit stiff. There's now going to be violent winds. You could now experience like a chill in the air. So this is all post-flood now. So like there's a little bit of a weather change that they're going to have to deal with. That includes like dark clouds and sky, and it now could rain again. It had never rained before, but now, oh yeah, things can evaporate and condense, and rain can fall, and there can be movement. Even though there's some of these kind of radical changes, there's the biggest change is that there's no more wicked people on the planet. You don't have to turn on CNN and hear Adam Schiff, he's gone. No, whoever you think just drives you crazy or is a liar or a hurtful person or an abusive person or a brutal person or a violent person or just an indifferent person spiritually, that's all gone. So there's a whole new world here, literally. Yes, the oceans have changed. They've gotten more extensive and more expansive to accommodate all this water that we have, I think. The lands are probably a little bit different. I think there's probably parts of land that's not as inhabitable as it was prior to the flood. Like, when you drive, to Las Vegas or something, you're like, what was God thinking out here? I don't know if it was made like that, before the flood, but after the flood, there's definitely places in the world where you're going, wow, just never recovered, never quite came back, And of course, what's so interesting, you go in these desert places or Grand Canyon and you find sediment and layers of sediment and fish fossils. And so there is even still like remnants of, it was a lot better back in the day, but now it's a little bit of a graveyard for a lot of things that like were taken out. The thermal vapor blanket has now dissipated. So there's going to be strong temperature differentials, which we can see now, like if you go to the poles versus like the equator, it's like, whoa, there's real, that range wasn't there before, but we're going to have that now, which means ice can pile up and, do different things. And of course, there's climate people that are very concerned about all of this, and I really don't want to discourage them, but I'm like, you're observing, different things that are very interesting, but I don't think you have any power to control any of it. God's been kind of in charge of all this weather stuff for a long time, but bless their hearts, right? The mountain ranges, I do think, are now more rugged and have risen up quite a bit. I do think the continents have seemed to shift post-flood. Again, I'm a theologian. I'm not a geologist or anything, but I'm just taking notes of the things that the smart people I trust are like, these are probably reasonable differences, winds and storms and rains and snow and different range that wasn't, as common before. And then just now that vapor canopy is gone, there's, more radiation, more exposure to certain kind of lights, and therefore we know that our lifespan is totally different now after the flood. You're not living to 900 years. 120 is like generous, 100's great. Now it's down to like 82 or 84 or 76, or there's a lot going on. There's now glaciers and rivers and lakes that there weren't before, because there's kind of areas that the water kind of moved into the crevices of kind of the new topography changes. The crust of the earth, I'm told, is quite different than it was before. The crust of the earth is more unstable, so we can have volcanic things, and here in California we have some seismic movement when the crust is in a state like, oh, it's kind of had a little burp today, a little hiccup. It feels like it's moving. So these things aren't as important to me as learning about God, but it does help me to understand when people are like, why are there fires and flash floods and earthquakes? Like, why would God allow that? It's like, this is all because of us. It was like stable, beautiful temperatures all the time. You know, we were in San Diego, as I shared with you, and people are like, this is amazing. You know, they're coming from Minnesota, you know, and they're like, this is the temperature. It's like, is it like this all year? And, you know, the people around are like, it's pretty much like this. It's like, okay, that's the last remnant, apparently, San Diego, of the pre-flood climate zone. But for most of the world, it's like, oh yeah, in Minnesota, you know, it starts to get cold, you know, and, you know, by December, well, don't come back till after May, you know. It's like, well, maybe April, you know, but they're like, it's dramatic. And that is, it's fun to see a little postcard of snow, but living in it is rough. It's hard. The hurricanes in Florida, you know, that's rough. But all of those are consequences of us and our sin, and God having to literally baptize the entire planet and do a do-over. Literally saying, look, I'm going to give Noah and anyone else who wants to follow him a fresh new start, but it's so evil and so violent, and people have gotten so hostile that and so weird and so demonic. Right? We looked at the Nephilim, so devilish. I need to clean house. And so here we are, just kind of a new start. And as I shared before, super fun hearing about these boys who had really a rough, abusive, tragic upbringing. But then God brings in kind of a new father mentor, give them like a new start. They still have stuff to work through, but like a new day. Kind of reminds me of Noah. It's like all the abuse and the violence, that's gone, but there's still trauma. And we're going to see eventually they're going to have to disembark and build culture again and start over. And we're going to see, because we're going to go all the way to Genesis 11 in the next 3 chapters, I guess it didn't wash out our sin nature, because people can still be cuckoo and selfish and fallen and broken, and they can still reject God. And God's been gracious. He's compassionate. He's like, I care about you. I want you to get on board, but there are limits. So we have to start over. Amen?